Now let's switch gears and talk about an anniversary many thought would never be reached. The Rolling Stones are about to mark 50 years together, and what a wild ride it's been. The greatest rock and roll band in the world has managed to survive through death, drug busts, arrests and bitter personal feuds.
Christopher Sandford has been chronicling the Stones' exploits for 25 years. He just published a biography of the group to mark the big milestone. Now, I just started by asking him about the Stones' first gig in London's Marquee Club way back in July 1962.
It was an audience of about 60 or 70 people. Probably half of them were bussed in by the band members themselves, and they all went to the pub afterwards. By coincidence, Charlie Watts, who was not playing, happened to be in the pub, so that's fate for you. And they all agreed that if it lasted 12 months, they'd be lucky. So 49 years plus later, here we are.
Of course, it wasn't Mick and Keith who were driving the band in those very early days. It was very much the ill-fated Brian Jones who was the soul of the group.
Well, Brian certainly saw himself as the leader. Of course, there was friction early on, mainly over songwriting as to who really was calling the shots. But he used to collect the money before they had a manager, and he would always make sure that he got a double share of the dough. So that caused some tension early on, and it all went kind of downhill from there for Brian.
Now, the band's purple patch creatively was from the mid-60s to, say, the early 70s. They produced hit after hit, but surprisingly, reading the book, with minimal artistic debate.
It was all done on a kind of grunt and a nod, I think, yes. I spoke to a few people who were there with them in those years, and it was never a question of them sitting down with a notepad or even any musical notes and trying to work it out like that. It was all done very much on a kind of trial or error basis, and you got some great music out of it. So, the untrained approach really worked for them.
Now, things started going pear-shaped for the Stones in the late 70s. Keith Richards, of course, was in the grip of a very serious heroin addiction. He came very, very close to going to jail. It is surprising that the Stones didn't self-destruct in that period.
Well, the wheels did nearly come off, that's true. But, the thing about Keith, I always think, is that the guy certainly has lived, there's no doubt about that. But he also knew, I think he had a very shrewd sense of when to pull back, and in the interest of self-preservation and preserving the band. And I know for a fact that some of the amber liquid that Keith is known to tote around in this huge vase-like container that he's kind of legendary for has on occasion been iced tea. So I'm not saying that's his constant tipple, but I think he does have that image, little like the late Dean Martin, where he kind of put on the slurred act somewhat for effect, and he was a shrewd, still is, a very shrewd long-term career guy.
Do you see Keith Richards as the creative soul of the group?
Well, he's certainly come up with most, if not all, of those iconic riffs. Although, ironically, maybe one that we associate with the Stones more than almost any other, Brown Sugar, was done by Mick, sitting in the Australian bush, trying to make Ned Kelly all those years ago with Tony Richardson, the director. And he was strumming an acoustic guitar in one of the many delays in shooting and came up with the Brown Sugar riff. So we got to doff your hat to Mick for that. But certainly Keith is the guy who came up with almost all those crunching, 5-second riffs that we still love today.
Now, the running theme of the book is this long-running personal and professional feud between Mick and Keith. It is truly remarkable, isn't it, that they've managed to put aside often very deep personal loathing to get together for tours and studio sessions over the years.
Well, I guess if you get paid that much money, you swallow quite a lot of your personal problems. I think the obvious analogy is they're kind of like an elderly married couple. Can't live with them, can't live without them, that kind of thing. They've known each other since they were 5 or 6 years old, and there's bound to be friction, as you say, there is. But I think when it comes to getting on stage for those 2 hours, whatever it is a night, all of that is put aside, and it's for the greater good, both the music and the money. As long as those two things work for them, I think they'll keep it going.
Now, the Stones have become one of the world's most successful commercial entities, let alone what they do in the studio. They have this very well-oiled global tour operation and, of course, this rampant merchandising production outfit.
Yeah, one of the things in the book I discovered was Mick's old record at the London School of Economics. He managed to get through 2 out of his 3 years there as a student. And the third year he was kind of getting the stones off the ground. But it's interesting to note that even when he was 19, 20, 21, he was still a very canny financial brain. Even then, he was always looking at the bottom line, questioning his tutors about, long-term royalty rates for a band and, whether it was better to be signing this or signing that. And I mean, this was before even he had the opportunity to put that into practice. So he was always focused on the financial side, and it's served him well.
Do you expect the Stones to get back together to mark the big 50th anniversary?
Well, there's sort of an official date, at least I think it's official, of July the 12th, which marks the 50th anniversary of the first ever show they gave. I doubt we'll see them on stage then. It takes them months now to get the whole thing, rolling, and the equipment and the entourage. But I would think within the next 12 months, we'll see shows. Whether they still do these kind of 2-year enormo tours that they're famous for, I doubt. But I think we'll see them do, 10 nights here, 10 nights there, and we haven't heard the last of them.
Rolling Stones biographer Christopher Sandford, and we've just discovered we have our own link here on ABC News Breakfast with the very first Rolling Stones gig that Christopher was talking about at the Marquee Club in London.
Yes,
50 years ago.
One of our director's dads happened to be there.
John, yes. He's now got his own piece of, I'm sure it's not the first time he's been bragging about it, but and his dad also went to school with Robert Plant. How's that for a double?
Imagine those stories down at the pub.
It's pretty hard to beat.
Pretty hard to top that.
Yeah. Director John, rock royalty, come on down.